Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing the conversations, endless conversations about the cultures of consciousness. I mean, we've been doing this thing for 7 years now. I mean, I feel like I should get an award, a gold star, a gold plaque. But I am nonetheless rewarded with the positive feedback that I get. I'm always happy to get emails from folks. I'm pretty rigorous about responding to people. And of course, the archive for the show is available on prn.fm under Expanding Mind, as well as my own website, techgnosis.com, techgnosis.com, which is full of all sorts of other goodies and writings and talks and information that I've been doing over these years. So check it out, and there's a great archive to dig through. This Sunday, on the wonderful date of July 23rd, I will be participating in the RAW Day, Robert Anton Wilson Day, in Santa Cruz with a bunch of fun characters. So if you're in the neighborhood, consider swinging by. I'm really looking forward to meeting Adam Gorightly. We've had him on the show talking about the Discordian Society, which is, of course, a big influence on Wilson in the 60s and 70s. And as well, we're going to have one of my favorite magicians, the Italian magician Ferdinando Buscema, and the great Are You Serious?, another guest on the show and an old dear friend of mine. So I think it's going to be a rousing day. It's an afternoon of talks and panels, and then an early evening DJ set from Greg Wilson. So if you're, again, in the neighborhood, check it out. You can go to on Veno, VENNO.com, Raw Day. That'll get you to tickets and more information. And the whole thing was set up by our guest today, Daisy Campbell, someone I've been wanting to meet and talk to for quite a long time. Daisy's responsible for the recent Cosmic Trigger play, or Cosmic Trigger, the play. This is, of course, based on one of Wilson's greatest books, probably the most important in my mind, or the most entertaining, strange, and even disturbing, but in a good way. And we'll be talking more about that in a moment. But someone doing a play based on Robert Anton Wilson, I know they did it in the 70s. In fact, it was Daisy's dad, Ken Campbell, who did the famous 24-hour Illuminatus, or maybe it was even longer, Illuminatus performance in 1976. And we'll be talking about that for sure. I've always wanted to hear more about that as well. But, to be honest, I was like, well, I don't know. How could you really do it? A play, theater can be so, I don't know. But I got to say, the reports I heard were uniformly excellent, even from theater phobes that I knew who were able to see the show when it was performed in England in May over a 23-night run. So I don't know whether the rest of us will ever get a chance to see it again. Hopefully we can get some illumination on that question as well. But with no further ado, Daisy, welcome to Expanding Mind.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's great to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's well timed. I'm really looking forward to hanging out on Sunday. But given what we just said, of course, the Illuminatus trilogy was this great book that Wilson wrote with Robert Shea. Came out in 1975, written in the late 60s, early 70s. Filled with every conspiracy, esoteric theory of history. Hippie porn, drug riffs, Aleister Crowley, UFOs, Pulp Fictions. I mean, it's just a mind bender, and it definitely bent my mind. I very much remember the period of my life when I first read Illuminatus. I was in Berkeley, so it was kind of a good sort of picking up some of the psychogeographical vibes, and it definitely did a number to my head, as it's done to so many others. But it definitely did a number to your father's head, and so I've always wanted to hear a little bit more about his this play that he did. What was it like? How old were you? What was your impressions of it at the time? And then we can get to talking about a Cosmic Trigger later.
Okay, well, I'm going to disappoint you a bit. I wasn't even born because, in fact, I was born as a direct result of it because my
even
father.
Better.
My father was obviously the director and adapted it, and my mother played Eris, the goddess of chaos and confusion, a vital role, and Mavis, of course, and so they had this kind of love affair during the whole production, and I was born as a result. So Eris is actually my middle name as a result. So I'm steeped in this mythology, but I can't give you a first-hand account of what that Illuminatus production was like. But I can certainly kind of tell you some of its impact. And
sure, or even just like, I mean, was it like 24 hours or something?
No, you're muddling that with another of my dad's.
Oh, I'm a muddler.
He did two epic productions. One of them, the first, was Illuminatus, and that was, well, it was 11 and a half hours long when they did it in Liverpool, and when they transferred it, it actually opened one of the spaces at the National Theatre, the Cottesloe Theatre. So when they transferred it there, I think it went down to about 8 hours, and then it transferred again to the Roundhouse down to about 5 at this point. But the true aficionados say, you know, really the magic wasn't so much there by the time they got to the Roundhouse. It was really the Liverpool production that was the extraordinary one. But the other one, the 24-hour play, was The Warp, which was kind of the UK counterculture tale. It was the story of a guy who'd lived through, you know, it was sort of our Kerouac. We didn't really have the novelist, but we had this playwright, Neil Oram, who wrote his account of that whole period called The Warp, and that was the 24-hour long show. So two different epics.
Glad they have that clarified. But can you tell us, like, what was especially in Liverpool, like what was the scene like that your father was in, and what, like, you know, what was the kind of, because it had to be taking place in a world of people who are interested in this kind of thing, and of course 11 hours is a crazy length of time for anything. So it's clearly not your ordinary play. So what was that whole kind of milieu like?
Well, what happened was, I mean, it's a really strange tale. Basically, Carl Jung had a dream about Liverpool, and he wrote about it in his book Memories, Dreams and Reflections on, of course, page 223. And in this dream, there's a kind of a pool and a bush growing out of it. Anyway, it was of high significance to Jung. He called it his most important dream. And it was clearly in his mind set in Liverpool, and he realized that Liverpool was the pool of life, at least in his dream. So this poet called Peter Halligan, who lived in Liverpool, he got hold of a copy of this book, and he decided to make it his mission to find the site of Jung's dream, right? So, and I need to know more about what form this incredible quest took exactly. But anyway, he made it his mission, and I think it was a not inconsiderable search, but basically he discovered that it was at the crossing point of a number of streets in Liverpool, the main one being Matthew Street, which is in fact where the Cavern Club is, where the Beatles first performed as well. So it's clearly a bit of a power spot anyway, this. And he detected that it was right where this manhole cover was in the center point of all of these crossing points, that this was in fact the site of Jung's dream, and some dowsing and whatnot revealed that there had in fact been an underground stream there at that point. And then he noticed that on the corner of two of the streets, one of the buildings was in fact derelict. So he claimed it, and he sort of set up a kind of cafe and an art center, and it became a real hub of the whole kind of underground culture at that time in Liverpool. And they called it the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun. And my dad had always had connections with Liverpool. He wasn't living there, but he's always said, you know, if you ever want to get anything done, go to Liverpool, because everyone just says yes. And so he had various connections. And Peter Halligan phoned him and said, I think you should come and do a great production here in the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun. And Ken said, yeah, all right. I'll see. And he'd got this notion about science fiction theatre. He wanted to set up a science fiction theatre. He used to say, you know, when you think about it, the entire history, this is how he spoke, by the way, the entire history of literature is really just nothing more than people coming in and out of doors. Whereas science fiction, you see, it's about everything else. So he was very keen to set up a science fiction theatre, and he thought, oh, great, I'll set up the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. And then he went off to the sort of best alternative bookshop in Camden Town, and a book with a yellow submarine on it caught his eye for the obvious Beatles connection there. And he thought, oh, right, this is interesting. I'm going to turn to a sort of random page of this book, and if it's of any interest, I'll stick this on. And the page he turned it to was the description of Carl Jung. So that kind of sealed the deal. And so he got to work adapting it with his mate Chris Langham. And they kind of more or less turned up with it sort of half written, and they decided to do Discordian casting. So whoever was there on the particular day would be in it. And it was more or less a squat, this venue. And what they managed to create was something so utterly extraordinary sounding. And not only that, I mean, the caliber of people they attracted, you know, Jim Broadbent was in this production, Bill Nye was in this production, you know. It really was full of talent and extraordinary people. And so, yeah, they got to work. They'd rehearse it in the CAF because my dad always thought it was best to rehearse in public because the actors stop sort of fussing about and just get on with it. So they rehearsed it downstairs in the CAF, and then it was performed. And I think it was on the third performance they did that they'd managed to get Peter Hall from the National Theatre to come and see it in quite a coup. And what they did was, which I love this story, there was the guy who kind of looked after the building had built himself a little kind of corner out of, you know, a bit of plasterboard and whatnot. He'd sort of created his own little flat in the corner of the space. And Ken managed to persuade him to knock one wall down out of his little flat and turn his flat into the Royal Box. And the guy was trying to sort of clear it up a bit and make it a bit kind of more presentable for Sir Peter Hall, who was now on his way. And Ken said, no, leave it, bag butts and everything. No, just like it is. That will be the Royal Box. So it was from there that Sir Peter Hall witnessed this legendary production. And then, indeed, he decided it was groundbreaking enough to actually open what was to be the kind of radical space at the National Theatre. So that's
what a coup! What a
how
coup!
It came to be, yeah.
You know, well, here's a question. So you mentioned the kind of, you know, a lot of Illuminatus, a lot of this whole world we're talking about you know, active brain change and sort of dancing with all of these paranormal possibilities and science fictional possibilities. Of course, synchronicity plays a very central role in this. And you already mentioned some of the synchronicities that led up to the production. But I'm wondering, in your father's life, sort of after it came out and, in sort of the subsequent period of time, did he experience the kind of changes or some of the kinds of changes that Robert Wilson did? After, Robert Wilson, he writes this, co-writes this crazy fiction. And then, as Cosmic Trigger is about, and we'll talk about, it started to leak into his real life. I'm curious whether your father reported sort of an uptick in magical synchronicity or disturbing conspiracy signs in his own life once he invested in bringing it to life this way.
Yes, and actually what he said was, really we adapted it because we wanted an excuse to live in this extraordinary book. And that's sort of what everyone who was part of it and came to see it experienced, was that they got the kind of the full immersion of the Illuminatus experience, which is, as you say, hair-raising enough just reading it. So, imagine being sort of fully immersed with the characters all around you, bringing it to life. It without doubt, the upswing in synchronicity. I mean, also, Illuminatus is quite a dangerous book, as Wilson says about kind of Chapel Perilous, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. You can either emerge agnostic or paranoid, and there was definitely, there was one chap involved in the production, in fact, playing the man who killed God, who he became completely unhinged, believed he was getting messages from Sirius, I believe, and ended up sort of attacking a bag lady. He ended up in Broadmoor for many years, sort of the most draconian kind of mental institution over here. And so, there were some casualties, it has to be said. And certainly every time anyone ever mooted the possibility of sticking Illuminatus on again, my dad would go white at the prospect, So it definitely wasn't without its kind of dark side, the whole experience. But I think overall, I mean, he loved Bob's work. He loved it and returned to it over and over again and instilled in me a huge love of it as well. So I think more than anything, more than getting particularly heavily drawn into the conspiracy stuff himself, he loved the kind of lark and caper of it, really, the kind of the mischievousness of the humour and the endless blending of, not knowing what's true and what's fiction and that kind of thing. And he used those sort of techniques himself in his own work. So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really key point, and it also sounds like something that you really successfully achieved with the Cosmic Trigger play is that part of what I think part of the reason that Wilson is so important, and I think even more important today, where we can, this is another topic, but where our kind of post-truth reality is taking on some of the features of this sort of plunge into multiple reality tunnels. And, it can be quite disturbing and unmooring, and it's easy to get trapped into conspiracies. And there's all sorts of things that are kind of, I think, a more generalized condition now than people would have thought even in the 70s, when it was clearly a very relevant, resonant text. But I think that it's the humor, the personality of Ra, not just his ideas, but his way of being in the world, the kind of quality, the sort of avuncular, mischievous quality that had a little bit of a dark side, but was also very humane and very loving and whatever. And that you kind of pick that up. And so you sort of get inoculated in a way to prepare you for dealing with some of the more dangerous aspects of the world he's describing, which in some sense has become more the world we live in, for better or worse. And so I think that humor is really part of what the transmission, if you will, is about, as opposed to so much occultism and so much conspiracy theory, so much of that stuff is whether it's interesting or powerful or crazy or, batty or whatever, it's so often very, very, very serious. And so there's something about that humor that's really key.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's so key, and it so sets him apart from so many other kind of writers in a similar terrain. I agree. And it is, it's the sort of banish with laughter idea as well. That kind of, it just deflates you if you're taking it all too seriously. As he said, seriousness is not a vice I possess, which is one of my favourite quotes. And it's, and my dad was the same. He absolutely couldn't abide seriousness. And when he told his dad that he wanted to go into theatre, his dad said, "But only comedy, please. Don't do that serious stuff. People don't like it."
So I'm curious. Your father passed away almost 10 years ago, and were you already talking about were you already thinking about Cosmic Trigger back then, or was it something that kind of emerged after his death?
Yeah. So I mean, basically, I directed The Warp, the other epic that I was talking about earlier, the 24-hour one, kind of as my. While all my friends were doing their A-levels, which is sort of, the high school, I don't know what your equivalent is, at kind of 18, I was instead directing the world's longest play. And so ever since I, did my own version of that, the question had been, well, when are you going to do Illuminatus? And like I'd said, I could see that it was a very worrying prospect to my dad. So it certainly wasn't a thing it wasn't uppermost on my mind. But then after he died, the kind of calls for it got louder. And I, partly because of those reasons we've been talking about, I didn't want to be so much messing with people's minds this time. I wanted to do something a little bit more lucid that still brought through, the brilliance that is raw. And Cosmic Trigger is my absolute favourite book of his. I think it's the one that just it's like a toolkit. It's like some kind of map for traversing this kind of terrain. It's the book that covers what you do when all your maps have run out. And so that, and then, I'd been having thoughts about, well, maybe that would be the logical next step instead of doing Illuminatus, to do that kind of non-fiction type sequel. And then, of course, I can bring in some of the Illuminatus stuff. And then it occurred to me, well, of course, while he's writing it, I could also have my dad directing Illuminatus in Liverpool, and kind of cross between the two realities, if you like. So that's how we did it, is that it constantly moves from Wilson's story into Illuminatus, and then backstage at Liverpool, and the show going on. So it's a homage to my dad as well as Wilson, and to just the kind of the power of Wilson's philosophy, but also the power of a really good slung on show to transform people.
Yeah, wonderful. I definitely I have all these questions about the show, but before we get there, I want to ask a little bit more about what was your life like, such that you would wind up spending your late teens directing this play in the context sort of your father's work and the kind of world that was in. I mean, that's quite audacious. And it suggests to me that your whole sort of upbringing and relationship to your father's world and the theater world and the kind of countercultural world and the sort of playful mischievousness, the lark, the grand lark of it all was something that really shaped you very early on, so that you were kind of it in a way. So I'd just like to hear a little more about who were you when you took on this crazy 24-hour countercultural play?
Well, I mean, I was a fearless 18-year-old who thought I could do anything, and I knew. And the weird thing about doing something like that, it's so intense. There's nothing like. I mean, the Warp is a cast of about 40 people with about another, 30 odd cameos rolling all the way through the night. Quite often, you're still casting later bits of it whilst the play's already started, and it's truly an intense experience. I still don't know any better way to kind of forge an incredible community of people than to stick on a kind of impossible play, really. And doing that at 18, of course, I just thought that's what life is. And that's what it's always like. And it's always that intense and that fun and that full of people just pulling together, not for money or anything, just because. And so it was a bit of a rude awakening, I think, to realise, there's a whole other bit of life which is just a bit mundane and not again, another Wilson quote: people live in their myths, they merely endure their realities. And it was sort of that kind of gap opened up for me. And then, I often tell the story of the effect that reading Illuminatus had on me. It was in combination with some other factors, let's say, but I read it when I was 23, so I hadn't read it when I was doing the Warp and stuff. And it was this bizarre experience of kind of suddenly being initiated into my tribe. All of these kind of in-jokes, the 23s and the Discordians and, the eye and the triangle and all this stuff that I just was aware of. It was just in my, it was just there in my kind of the air that I breathed, I suppose. But suddenly it all kind of clunked into place, and I had this sort of profound feeling of like, I've just been initiated. And then life sort of became far too meaningful, and the synchronicities just went completely out of control, to the point that I sort of found myself in a plush loony bin somewhere near Kent, with rainbow knickers on my head for very important cosmic reasons. And I I had this moment where the kind of all the people gathered round to ask me, what are you doing here? And I said, oh yeah, synchronicities led me here. Look, open that magazine. This girl was clutching Soap Opera magazine. I said, open that magazine at any random page, and the answer to why I'm here will be in there. And she opened it up, and I kid you not, it said in huge pink letters across a double-page spread, "Daisy must lose some of her passion." So that was kind of a slightly startling. Yes, that was a sort of startling moment. So there, yeah, me in my rainbow knickers, kind of getting a bit of a wake-up call, I guess. And I put all this stuff very firmly back in its box, and I couldn't, there was a whole period where I couldn't really touch any of those kind of psychedelic writings that I loved so much, because they'd sort of send me back into rainbow knicker territory a bit. And then suddenly one day I just could, and I could just see the humor, and I could just get all the wisdom from it without needing to be kind of triggered into needing to go on a sort of mad bender or anything else. So so that was kind of my experience of reading Illuminatus.
Yeah, well, thank you for telling me that. I mean, that's something that I think is really important to acknowledge. One, that people go in and out of these experiences, and that they can be kind of harrowing and sort of losing the plot has some downsides in terms of your life. But in other ways, at least for some people, it's kind of part of the course. Like somewhere along the line, you lose the plot, and then you have to kind of get out of that. And sometimes people don't, and that's a drag. And sometimes they do. And in a way, like, to play with these ideas, there is a seriousness in the sense that you can't be entirely frivolous about the consequences of some of these ideas and some of these memes, if you will, or kinds of figures. And because they do clearly shape people's capacity, tendency to begin to recognize these kinds of patterns. And the funny thing about synchronicities, in my experience, and I haven't wound up with rainbow knickers in my head, but I've definitely wound up in other places with other sorts of parts of clothing on my head. I've definitely wound up in a place with a kind of FBI black suit on my head. Let's put it that way. But that, I mean, one of the amazing things about synchronicities is when you get a couple of them, they're so delicious. It's like, I think of them as like psychedelic grace. Like the traditional Christian idea of grace is that it's gratuitous presence of the Holy Spirit enters in your life and does something marvelous. It has nothing to do with anything you did. It's just purely God's will, and it's grace. And that synchronicities are kind of like that. They just show up, and they're like, yes, there is some deeper layer of meaning. Yes, there is some deeper connection in what can seem like a random collection of, absurd nothingness. And that's wonderful. And you get a couple, and then you get a few more, and like, wow, something's really happening. But it's just like a fader, like a DJ going from one, track to another. You move it too far, you get too many of them. It's a whole different ballgame, and that way madness lies, and so it's like this dance. It's because it's not that fun to live in a meaningless life, even if in the end maybe it is just an absurd thing that our brains are kind of throwing patterns on. Okay, maybe, but let's go in there. Let's see what happens when we let chance dictate things, when we open books to random pages, when we take whispering suggestions from the birds or from some passing advertisement or whatever. I mean, it's a very playful way to be with the world, and yet it requires this strange kind of, I don't know, it requires a sort of art of not going too far, which I take it is, of course, part of what you're looking at with Cosmic Trigger is like, what does it mean to go too far? How do you go back? What's the relationship between the magical synchronicity world and the mundane world where nonetheless we meet the people we love and we make decisions and we do work and, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I can only imagine that was part of what else you were working out by moving from Illuminatus to Cosmic Trigger. You're also kind of going, hey, the Illuminatus thing can take you too far. I don't what does it mean to like kind of keep these things in balance? So
yes, absolutely. And I realized what I was actually doing with those rainbow knickers. I was trying to regulate pronoia that I was experiencing, you know, the kind of creeping sensation that everyone everywhere is out to help you. Because that seems to be where my particular brand of madness lies. I end up thinking, oh, the whole world wants to help me put on an enormous play. So yeah, that was the Rainbow Knicker rationale. I think paranoids favour tinfoil, but Rainbow Knickers seemed the more apt choice for me.
More pronoia.
Yes, but pronoia. But yeah, synchronicities, exactly. And that state of pronoia is wonderful. But like you say, I think it's a trap in itself, you know, in a way, these kind of strata of consciousness. I do think it's so seductive that you do kind of have to let it go. There was a story, do you know Clarissa Pinkola Estes, you know, who wrote The Women Who Run with Wolves?
Oh, yes.
You know, and she tells this wonderful story that she'd been traveling and there'd been all these signs and synchronicities, and it was so extraordinary, and she just knew where she had to go next because there'd be some amazing sign. And she was telling her old wise grandmother about her travels and all these extraordinary synchronicities and signs and everything. And her grandmother just said, "Do you run around telling everyone, look at me, I'm breathing, my heart is beating, I'm breathing," you know? And I think there sort of comes a point with this stuff where you just have to kind of settle in and go, yeah, it's weird. Weird stuff happens, and actually quite a lot, you know, there's a lot of synchronicities around, but you just sort of, you breathe into them a bit more. You get a little bit less overexcited about it all, I think. And then you can kind of still conduct your life in a fairly organized fashion in the midst of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I'm going to probably talk about on Sunday is one of the reasons I think Wilson is so helpful is that, you know, in addition to staging these problems and encouraging you to begin to play with the possibility of synchronicity, which for a lot of readers actually ends up kind of working, and you start to learn how to question your assumptions and allow other possibilities to emerge in the midst of your life. As all those things are happening, he's also very grounded in a certain way. I mean, not all the time and not in all ways, but there's also a sort of sense of being being reasonable in your body. You know, you're still in your empirical body. You're experiencing the world. You're not, you know, just some ghost in a universal computer matrix or some other kind of weird myth. There's this kind of realism that he keeps coming back to. And then he keeps coming back to philosophically as well. If on the one hand, he's kind of skeptical about all of these large claims, and there's not a real concrete sense of what real reality is. On the other hand, he's very invested in thinking critically and sort of moving as a free moving agent, you know, engaging different possibilities, but always with that kind of skeptical edge, which creates its own sort of groundedness. So it's I think a really good, and from what I hear, you know, I unfortunately didn't get to see the play. I wish I had just gone there and seen it just for the heck of it, even though that's a pricey ticket. That was one of the things you were doing in your performance, as well as that there was a whole sort of thread that was about his real life, his mundane life, his life of having a family and being poor and, you know, being sort of alienated from society and and then that world kind of interacting with these more extraordinary possibilities as well. So I'd love to hear you talk just even a little bit about how you represented or dealt with his sort of real life, if you will, in the 70s when he was experiencing the things that he wrote about in Cosmic Trigger, how important that was to sort of show that side of the story.
Yeah, and it's all there in Cosmic Trigger, or you know, or a little bit of additional reading as well. But yeah, you know, he hints at it, but he's not really a man of anecdotes or anything. And it's certainly Cosmic Trigger isn't a kind of straight autobiography by any stretch of the imagination. But you know, certainly some of the big key events, and obviously the Cosmic Trigger sort of tragically ends with the death of his daughter. So, and you kind of only realise afterwards that the whole thing's been kind of shaking with this power, because it's sort of all building up to this moment where he's going to finally sort of write about Luna, and so I'd sort of try to have a kind of try and create that sort of similar quality, so that, you know, quite often the conversation, more of some of the more cosmic conversations he has are with Luna. The two of them share this sort of amazing affinity in the play, and I'm sure they did in life as well. And then and Arlen, and he doesn't write much about Arlen, but he hints at a kind of extraordinary tantric experience with her. This is his wife. So we made this kind of big set piece in the middle of Act 2, huge sort of tantric sequence where he ends up making love with a Sirius alien. And it was great. We had to go and learn how to kind of switch people around under beds and all sorts of stuff. So we've got the story of, and I think that's why, in a way, it needed to have that element of the vignettes, if you like, from Illuminatus that are sort of throughout it, because in a way that's his imagination, at large, and that really gives you a chance to kind of see the colour of what's going on. And then, meanwhile, he, in this kind of great leap of confidence and faith, he gives up his job at Playboy, which sounds like it was a pretty cushy job. And that, of course, was where he was writing Illuminatus with his colleague, Bob Shea, who, was to become a great friend, of course. And so there's, it sort of starts with the letters arriving. I mean, this story came from John Thompson, who did all that brilliant artwork for Cosmic Trigger, and he said that what actually happened was they put out a call for startling news stories that were being suppressed by the mainstream media. This is Playboy, and this was Wilson's idea. And then they got inundated in the most insane amount of letters about, every conspiracy theory you can possibly imagine, which gave Wilson this extraordinary insight into kind of the state of paranoia in America at that time, at least with the Playboy readers, I suppose. And so that was where this idea, they were working on the letters page. They were doing the kind of Playboy response to the letters, but inspired, or at least that's the artistic license I've taken, is that it very much inspired by those letters that they were receiving. Him and Bob decided to try and incorporate every single one of those conspiracies and more into their novel Illuminatus. So that's kind of where we begin the telling with them, and then you meet his wife just before his first ever acid trip. Again, slight artistic license. He had taken peyote before. I don't think it was Timothy Leary who actually gave him the acid that he took for his first acid trip. But there's certain little kind of like bits of license that one needs to take. And he actually he constantly breaks the fourth wall. So at the beginning of the second act, he comes on, he says, are you diehard fans all getting het up about all the historical inaccuracies? That kind of deals with all those problems in one fell swoop. In the second interval, he actually challenges everyone to try and get through the whole 23-minute interval without using the word I, and they have to bite themselves on their thumb really hard if they fail. So that was hilarious to hang out in the bar at that interval while everyone's desperately struggling to hold a conversation without saying the word I, because that was, again, one of his experiments. And we've got Alistair Crowley as a kind of accordion-playing spectre who just sort of sings his great maxims, kind of wandering through and around. And then Eris herself constantly interrupting proceedings and, demanding to turn the whole thing into a panto and getting the audience up to enact, the Mount Olympus and her mythology, and an enormous golden apple suddenly flies in from God knows where. And so, it's got many layers. It never, ever takes itself too seriously. You constantly think, oh, this is the sort of show it is it? And then it goes, no, it's not that sort of show. And then now let's have a song. In fact, let's have a song in prison with Timothy Leary singing the Eighth Circuit consciousness model.
No, it sounds so delicious. Of course, I have to ask. I can only assume that at some point when you were thinking about, since we're going to be in Santa Cruz this weekend, and Santa Cruz is, of course, where Bob lived the last part of his life, and he was very associated with with Northern California for much of his life. I can only assume that you had at least had tried initially to perhaps bring the production out here. Was that ever part of the
Absolutely. And yeah, because the whole, when we did it first in 2014, quite a short run, but we did it in Liverpool. It had to be Liverpool, and then London, and we did about 7 shows back in 2014. And we funded those through a crowdfund, and it was really because the very last scene of the play is, I don't know if you recall, but when he was dying, there was I think it was Douglas Rushkoff, in fact, sent out.
It was Rushkoff, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was, and he sent out a message basically saying, if Robert Anton Wilson changed your life, send him $23 now. He can't, he couldn't afford his medical bills. He couldn't afford to stay in his home. He just wanted to die in his own home. And, the response was just extraordinary of these, checks for $23 just arriving through his door constantly. And so that's where the play ends, is with all those letters arriving. And so I was thinking about how to fund it, and it took my partner Greg to say, well, the clue's in the last scene, surely. I went, oh yeah, crowdfund, £23 or $23 or whatever, or 23p, whatever you can afford. And it was just amazing. Before we even managed to get the proper official, Indiegogo campaign set up, people would just send it, I was being sent cash and sent checks, prior to it even becoming official. It was just amazing. And that really let us know that this was a thing people wanted. But a load of that funding was coming from the States, which was so touching. They knew it was going to be a production in the UK, but nonetheless, people felt moved to help fund this thing. And I think there was a period where there was a real anxiety amongst Robert Anton Wilson fans that he was kind of going to be forgotten. He wasn't going to be remembered. And so I think it was partly that, and just, whenever you meet someone whose life was changed by Robert Anton Wilson and you tell them they're doing a play, they will basically drop everything and come and do anything. It's just been amazing. That's been the experience here. So in answer to your question, are we trying to get it over to Santa Cruz? Ever since then, we've sort of known we've got to try and honour the fact that we got so much support from people in the States by trying to get it over there. And our difficulty is that the whole thing has been built on this incredible kind of grassroots upswelling of just enthusiasm and, and people just coming together and making it happen. And, as soon as you introduce things like visas and, cost of flights and all that, it's much, much harder to sort of keep the enthusiasm up and going. And also trying to make things happen when you haven't met the people you're dealing with face to face and all the rest of it. So in the end, I just said, look, I'm going to be in Santa Cruz on the 23rd of July, and we shall see if there is sufficient upswell to really make this happen. So frankly, it sounds to me like the American Raw fans, our goal is to seduce you into being able to come out here enough to fall in love with the place, so that you can, because you can draw. If you get local enthusiasm going, then it sort of obviates some of the problems of bringing over the cast. On a practical level, I think, if we could just get our sort of leading man and leading lady over, they're the, Arlen and Bob are kind of the spine of the piece, and then, all the other madness swirls around them. And, and a lot of the, when we were seriously talking about it, a lot of the actors are like, I just pay for myself. I don't care. I'm coming, so it's not, it's gonna, I think it will happen. I think it will happen. It just, we need to start kind of connecting up those dots a little bit more.
Yeah.
And, and I think people sort of assume, especially when they're not in theatre, like, well, shows come here all the time, and it's it's like, but we're not the West End. We're just just a audience.
Yeah, no, I was part of a very similar kind of thing, and we some friends and I did a rock opera about Burning Man. It was kind of a cross between Rocky Horror Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar, and it was ended up being like the largest. We did a number of versions of it, but the largest one had like 40 people in the cast, and it was completely absurd, and there's no way we would ever make any money, and I can't believe it happened, and it just like it, and it was just like this crazy, life changing, like nothing, but it was very Discordian and wacky and didn't really have it, and it was just like it was very illuminating though, like looking at the hard reality of what does it mean to like put shows on over time and make them sustainable. It's like much, much, much harder than even like most Broadway show, people who are trying to get to Broadway or whatever. I mean, it's a tough game, especially if you have a bunch of people in it, which is what you want. If you have these kinds of stories that are so collective and they're about all of these different perspectives and things undermining each other, you need a lot of people. You need that sense of like a whole community there. And then that makes it even
well, that's what makes it feel so immersive. And, more or less every actor in it is part of this whole legacy. The woman playing Eris was in the original production of Illuminatus. The guy playing Robert Anton Wilson was the lead in the 24-hour play that I mentioned. So it is we're bringing our own sort of strong theatrical legacy and community to it all as well. So that's like you say, it's a big part of it. And no uncommodifiable art. Yeah, that seems to be the only kind I know how to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing about him because you mentioned before about Wilson fans being like, is he going to be forgotten? And I think he's in a very interesting place right now because as we've seen, like a lot of the counterculture and esotericism, conspiracy theory, like a lot of these things that used to be pretty marginal aren't so marginal anymore. As reality starts to melt down, as capitalism looks for newer sources of like cultural commodities, like all of this stuff becomes kind of available, with the return to psychedelic research and the upsurge in yoga and meditation. Like there's just kind of a way in which we're in reality has more room for altered states and for weirdness, frankly. But at the same time, Wilson hasn't been rediscovered yet on that scale. It's kind of cruising along. But to my mind, he's more important than, let's say, a later figure like Terence McKenna or even Leary in some ways. Mm-hmm. Like there's something about the way in which he deals, especially with conspiracy theory, especially with the kind of dark side of politics. I mean, you read through his, one of the things I forget about him because it's so easy to talk about in terms of science fiction and serious and crazy conspiracy theories. It's like the dude knew his history too, and he was very aware that history is a grim tale of elites manipulating and harassing everybody else, and he had no illusions about what actual human history was like. So in a way, his attitude, I think, is more even resonant and appropriate for people to wrestle with today than a lot of other kind of countercultural ideas or mystical freak ideas and stuff like that. So and I'm kind of curious, like when after Beyond the Faithful, what sort of response did Cosmic Trigger stir up among larger theater goers or the London Society or whatever?
Extraordinary thing, because we were asking ourselves exactly the same question. That first run we did in 2014, we were more or less preaching to the choir, and it was a joyous thing, and inspired so much kind of came out of that first production. Just people just like finding water in the desert. Like, I thought I was the only Discordian left. I thought I was the only person who could remember, but and just to realize, no, look, we're all out there, and bring them all together. So that had its own kind of joyous quality. But yeah, we were anxious about how it was going to go down with the sort of larger audience that we were now reaching out to. It went down great. I mean, people were just constantly saying, I'd never heard of him, but they got it, they completely got it. And people were coming back 2 or 3 times, a bit like when you first read Wilson. That feeling, I had it so strongly after I read Cosmic Trigger. As soon as I finished it, I thought, that doesn't exist, that book. I don't think that can't exist, can it? Is that what I really just read? And I think people had a really similar reaction who were being exposed to Wilson for the first time, to the play. They'd sort of come out like, did really? and almost have to come back and just sort of check what they'd seen. It was people, and what was interesting, people took all different things. A lot of people took away the kind of belief is the death of intelligence idea of, just that as soon as you believe something, you stop sort of thinking, really, in a sense. You've kind of you've crystallized your opinion about something, and that's it. You're not going to revisit it now. So that, I think, was great. People loved the whole, Leary and Wilson's Eighth Circuit model of consciousness. It might have had something to do with having a song and dance number of people in their orange jumpsuits. May have had a impact on that. But no, it translated remarkably well. And even, we got the Telegraph and the Guardian and these rather sort of straight newspapers came, and they got it, and people really got. What was interesting was that it wasn't nearly as relevant when we did it in 2014. We weren't yet in the kind of alternative fact, post-truth reality. And no one was, Trump hadn't been elected and all the rest of it. Brexit hadn't happened. And so, so then to sort of to be bringing it back in 2017, where suddenly it felt really kind of very relevant and quite an important toolkit to deal with, a sort of post-truth reality, really.
Yeah. It's quite relevant, and even when you get into to Wilson's politics, which is another whole story. I mean, he was, in many ways, a real tried and true libertarian, right-wing anarchist, whatever you want to call it, but what's fascinating is also, it's like he's simultaneous, and so you can look a lot of the post-truth reality, the whole alt-right in the United States especially, is actually very discordian in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's like, and they're using the same kind of awareness of symbols, the same sense of pranking and whatever. And you realize that those methods, that those truths about the way reality can be constructed are not linked to particular moral values. They could be linked to a lot of different kinds of moral values. And one of the interesting things about Wilson is the way in which is that even though he was a libertarian and even a kind of techno-libertarian in some ways, his actual sort of ethics and relationship to people and relationship particularly to people to poverty, to people, the fact that there's a lot of people who aren't winners, was totally different than the kind of the main force of libertarianism that we have now, at least in America and California, where it's like super, it's like leave them in the dust. Who cares about those people? No social services. Let's just break out and we'll create our own technological futures. We don't need this dead weight of everybody else. But Wilson wasn't like that at all. So he's this sort of interesting mix of.
He is a really interesting mix. Yeah, he doesn't lose his heart and his social conscience ever, and he doesn't ever lose his roots. And also, I think one of the points I tried to make in the play is I sort of contrast him somewhat to Leary and to Kerry Thornley, who was one of the founders of Discordianism, who both, in their own ways, kind of are the victims of their own philosophies. And particularly like to take Leary, his kids wouldn't talk to him. He didn't. His own personal life was quite a mess. Whereas Wilson had this, amazing, incredibly loving marriage. And he just, like you say, he seemed in his life to make the right choice, to make the loving choice. Despite his kind of he said an interesting quote, which I think kind of helps to get that sense of what a kind of bridger he was, the left think that all the problems in the world are down to big business and the right think all the problems in the world are down to government. They're both right. And I think that sort of, kind of sums up in some ways where he kind of stood.
Yeah, it's that human element that's really keeps coming back to him. And even at the one time I met him I'd seen him give talks and sort of said hi to him at parties or whatever. But when I went by his apartment in Santa Cruz when he'd do the Wednesday nights, he'd read a passage from Finnegan's Wake and then blow us all away with how much he could make out of this like moderate gobbledygook. But it wasn't so much just that his performance but just the people around him and the wonderful ladies who were there from the local cannabis activism community and people who were supporting him when he was, frail at this point, not quite in the dying phase yet, but it wasn't that far off. And there was just a sense of of his enjoyment of people in that way that was really very different than someone like Leary, who's always pulling a move on you or like putting on a mask and stuff like that.
Yes.
Well, we'll got a couple of any special surprises on Sunday in Santa Cruz.
Well, I'm so excited myself. I've kind of managed to get a lineup together of all the people I wanted to meet, more or less, and get them all on stage together. And there's still a few tickets available. So I think anyone out there whose life was in any way impacted by Robert Anton Wilson should probably make a good effort to be there on Sunday. It may be the start of something. I would like to think, and certainly just a great opportunity to celebrate a great man. And also, we should say why the 23rd of July, because this was the day that he claims he maybe made contact with Sirius in Cosmic Trigger. It's the start of the Dog Days, and it's also the day that the mayor of Santa Cruz, I think the mayor who was 10 years ago, declared 23rd of July Robert Anton Wilson Day, and so it seems like a particularly auspicious and apt day for us to be meeting. And
Absolutely.
Of course, and it's 10 years since his death as well. So it's a good time for a raw pilgrimage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also for me, I think it's really key, those just like what we started off talking about Liverpool and the kind of psychogeography that helps set up the performance of Illuminatus. That in the same way, I think that places do have a certain kind of memory. They have something to say as well towards these kinds of gatherings. So I think having this in Santa Cruz is a really, it's another part of the tale, and another reason I think ultimately Cosmic Trigger will have to come to California. You see, the push is on.
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling it. Definitely.
Well, I mean, it's great. Sunday will be a great way to sort of mass forces and see what we can come up with. It might be easier than we think.
Exactly. Yes, we just need to gather the grassroots up, and we'll be away. It will be great.
Yeah, we'll gather the grassroots and smoke them.
Yes.
All right, Daisy. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Thanks so much for joining us on Expanding Mind.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Erik.
Great. That was Daisy Campbell. You can find out more about the Cosmic Trigger play at cosmictriggerplay.com, and hopefully you'll get a chance to see it at some point. So until next week, keep your minds open.